Revenge with Karen.
Security will escort you out, he said like he was ordering fries. The COO didn't look at me, didn't need to. His voice was smooth, almost bored, piped through the office intercom like a fire drill announcement. Everyone turned, mid-keystroke, mid-scroll, mid-bite of whatever sad desk lunch they were pretending to enjoy. Phones paused midair. Forks hovered in mouths. Slack messages went unsent. Me? I didn't flinch. Didn't give him the satisfaction. Just stood up slow, like gravity was thicker today, like every joint had something to say about this moment. You've been let go effective immediately, he added for the crowd. Not HR, not legal, him. The same guy who once called our work replaceable, like talent came shrink-wrapped on a shelf somewhere between Ethernet cables and morale-boosting stress balls. I zipped my laptop bag, quiet, deliberate. No tantrum, no scene. I wasn't going to make this easy for him. Not because I was trying to be noble. I just knew I had about 8 minutes before they cut my access. Maybe less if the intern in IT was sober today. The office air felt thick with something unspoken, pity, fear, maybe relief that it wasn't them. Again, see, I was the last one. The last original engineer who'd built the bones of this company when it was a few ramen-fueled nights away from bankruptcy. The others were gone. Quiet layoffs masked as strategic pivots. They'd gutted the soul of the dev team like it was a spreadsheet error. First, they took out Mike, who wrote the payment rails. Then Jess, who handled our backend auth so seamlessly you forgot it existed. Then Liam, the API whisperer. Gone, gone, gone. I knew I was next the day they promoted a product manager who thought JSON was a new social app. The writing was on the commit logs. But this, firing me in front of the entire office like a damn halftime show, that wasn't incompetence. That was cruelty dressed up in khakis. Please follow us, the HR rep said, flanked by two guys from building security who looked apologetic enough to almost pass as human. I nodded once, looked around. The new hires, fresh from boot camps, still believing culture was a real thing, averted their eyes. The older ones, they just looked tired. No one said a word. No goodbyes. No back pats. No you'll land on your feet. Just silence and the sound of my boots on the laminate as I walked toward the elevator like a condemned man pacing toward the needle. But here's the part they didn't know. I'd already packed up the real things 2 nights ago. My physical stuff, keyboard, mousepad, the dinosaur mug from my kid, that was just theater. The only thing that mattered was the code, the footprint, and I had already left one. Not a bomb, nothing malicious. I wasn't stupid. They were gunning for an acquisition, $200 million dangling in front of their eyes like it had a bow on it. One hint of sabotage, and I'd be lawyered into the next century. No, what I left behind was a breadcrumb. Subtle, legal, devastating if you knew where to look. The elevator doors opened. I didn't turn around, didn't wave. But I did allow myself one microscopic smile as the doors closed, because while the COO was busy peacocking for a room full of people who didn't care, I'd already pushed a commit. One that passed every check. One that looked like nothing. One that would change everything. I always thought I'd go out with a whimper, not a goddamn parade. As soon as the elevator landed on the ground floor, they peeled me off toward the glass fishbowl HR calls a reflection space, basically a repurposed conference room with a dead succulent and a stale whiff of lavender oil diffusers. You can almost hear the ghost of every career they've executed in that room. The HR rep, Melissa, I think, or maybe Marissa, offered a tight, neutral smile. She slid a bland white envelope across the table like it was a peace treaty. Severance is outlined here. 2 weeks. Standard NDA. I didn't touch it. Just let it sit there like a moldy sandwich. Few coworkers had followed the body down the hall, pretending they had to pee or grab a snack. But we both knew what this was, office rubbernecking. One guy, Jared from Front End, hovered too long outside the glass. I met his eyes and gave the slightest shake of my head. He looked away, ashamed of nothing in particular. HR cleared her throat. We'll need your laptop before you go. I nodded slowly, zipped open my bag like I hadn't been rehearsing this moment for 3 weeks straight. Of course, I said, voice calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that makes dogs growl. But instead of handing it over, I placed it gently on the table. I'll need 5 minutes. There's some build pipelines I spun up personally. Can't leave them hanging. You know how brittle the staging server's been lately. She blinked, unsure. I watched the internal tug-of-war play out in her eyes. Follow the checklist or avoid a scene? 5 minutes, she said, standing up. I'll just grab your final check. She left the room, Alone now, just me, the laptop, and the ghosts of better days. I opened the lid. The familiar glow hit my face like a sunrise in hell. No VPN needed, I still had local access. They were too sloppy to revoke that yet. Bless their arrogance. I didn't rush. That's the trick. Panic looks suspicious. Calm is forgettable. I navigated to the repo. Top level, master branch, nothing fancy. Nothing recursive or hidden behind base 64 crap that screams guilty. Just one file, a small one, readme.md. I updated 2 sentences. Changed a flag. Swapped a reference link to a doc they never knew existed. A document that outlined the tangled spaghetti they called a codebase, dependencies stacked like Jenga blocks soaked in gasoline. And came the actual commit. Git commit mcleanup. Removed outdated module references, git push origin master, that was it. The payload wasn't in the code, it was under it. Metadata tags buried in comment headers. Trace signatures pointing to license strings no one had permission to use. A time-stamped fingerprint with just enough breadcrumbs for the right kind of engineer to say, "Wait a minute." I closed the lid. Lissa returned with a manila envelope and an apologetic smile. All set, I echoed. She handed me the check like a bribe and reached for the laptop. I let it go without a fight. That part of me, the one who built things here, who cared, died the moment they turned my exit into office theater. As we walked back through the open floor, a few coworkers offered weak, broken looks. One mouthed, "I'm sorry," as if that cost her anything. I didn't answer. Didn't need to, because I wasn't angry anymore. Not really. This wasn't vengeance. It was precision, surgical. By the time anyone noticed what I'd done, I'd be sipping burnt diner coffee and ghosting LinkedIn recruiters like a woman reborn. I didn't burn the place down. I just turned on the lights. It looked like nothing. Just a quiet little commit. No fancy syntax, no glaring red flags, not a single semicolon out of place. I left it like a lipstick stain on a coffee cup. Casual, forgettable, intentional. The commit hash would sit there in the logs like a pebble on a railroad track. 7C cleanup, removed outdated module references. 8 characters, that's all it takes to shift gravity. I'd spent the last 3 weeks building it like a time-release pill. Something that wouldn't explode, just expand, subtly, slowly. Until one day, someone poked at it too hard and realized their fingers were wet with kerosene. It was technically compliant. Technically, the language was cleaned up. An old config path removed. A dangling reference to a deprecated service deleted. Nothing that would raise an alarm. In fact, it passed every automated check they had, which told me exactly how lazy the new dev leads had become. But deep in the header of a markdown doc, buried behind a commented-out table of contents, was the trail, not code, just clues. Mentions of libraries they'd long forgotten we were using. Repos nested inside vendor folders that hadn't seen a license update in 5 years. One in particular, a library forked from a European developer still under a restrictive GPL variant. Not BSD, not MIT, not safe. It had always been a liability. We'd flagged it years ago. But the CTO, who was now stepping back for family reasons, said it was fine. No one reads licenses anyway, he'd said. Until someone does. Real Gem was a module I'd written myself. Back in the early days. The kind of code you write when you're still naive enough to believe in team lunches and startup equity. That module handled dynamic tokenization for user session tracking. A tiny thing, but threaded through everything else like fishing line through raw meat. They never formally acquired it. Because back then, I was freelancing under an LLC, and legal never did the paperwork to transfer ownership. Assumed the standard works for hire clause covered it. But the clause didn't exist in that contract. I checked. Twice. And now that code, my code, was inside the product core, calling functions, running live, and thanks to the metadata I dropped, it was about to be rediscovered. Not loudly, not like a fire alarm, more like a rattle in the engine you can't locate but suddenly can't unhear. As I stepped out of the building and into the overcast daylight, I didn't look back. The security guard gave me a polite nod. I nodded back. I wasn't angry, not anymore. That's the thing about grief. After the storm, there's clarity. And clarity is cold, clinical. I was done trying to prove my worth to men who thought loyalty was a Slack emoji. I walked to my car, a battered Civic with a cracked dashboard, and sat for a second. Let my pulse settle. Watched a bird land on the power line like nothing had happened. Commit was already live, already merged, already invisible. But somewhere down the line, a CTO from a buyer company, some sharp-eyed bastard with a caffeine addiction and a decade of technical debt PTSD, was going to read it. He was going to trace the dots. And when he did, he wasn't going to see sabotage. He was going to see liability, the kind that delays acquisitions, triggers legal reviews, spooks boardrooms, and none of it was illegal, none of it malicious. It was just the truth. And the truth, when timed right, is the most elegant weapon of all. The office tried to pretend it didn't smell like smoke. 2 days after I walked out, the company fired up like nothing happened. HR sent a chipper all-staff email about team continuity and evolving resource alignment, which is corporate code for we fired the last person who knew how the machine worked. We're hoping nobody notices before the confetti cannon goes off. Because the acquisition was still on, $200 million. That's what they thought they were worth. PR went into overdrive, spitting out canned optimism. We're thrilled to join forces. Synergies, shared vision, disruption. The usual alphabet soup, the coup. He started dressing sharper, voice always an octave lower in meetings. Practiced charisma, just enough to look like he belonged in front of a camera instead of behind an invoice. He scheduled a walkthrough with the buyer's team and personally requested the Livestream production crew. He rehearsed his talking points like he was prepping for a wedding toast, smiling at his own bullshit, pausing for imagined applause. He never mentioned me, not once, but the engineers still on the inside, they noticed. One by one, I started getting texts from former teammates. Nothing obvious, just breadcrumb messages like, "Hey, you okay? Can we talk? Did you leave something behind?" I ignored them all. Not out of cruelty, just clarity. If they had to ask, they weren't ready to know. Inside, the dev team tried to make sense of my last commit. They pulled it up, read it, squinted, clean up, removed outdated module references. It passed CI. It passed security scans. It passed the goddamn intern spot check. So they shrugged, moved on, because nobody in that office had the time or clearance to trace legacy code across a 6-year time span. Nobody wanted to pull the thread that might unravel the whole sweater, especially not with the buyer's lawyers scheduled to show up with a pen and a giant check. Some of them whispered about me. You could feel it on the company Slack, like ghost fingers pressing on the back of your neck. She didn't even fight it. Must have had something else lined up. I heard she tried to poison staging. One really knew. But they wanted a reason, something simple, something that fit neatly in a calendar invite, and I gave them nothing, because sometimes silence is the message. Meanwhile, I watched, not obsessively, just enough, just often enough to know the countdown had begun. I checked the public repo daily, watched commit logs roll by like trash floating down a river, empty merge requests, comment threads full of guesses, pull requests that said, "I think this fixes it. We should clean this up before the announcement." They were patching potholes without realizing the road was sinking. I scrolled through the company blog, saw the press kit assets get updated. The logo, now future-facing. The product page, filled with buzzwords we never used when we were actually building the damn thing. I watched the COO post a selfie with the lead buyer on LinkedIn, 2 smiles wide enough to hide the cracks underneath. His caption, "Big moves ahead. Proud of the work our team has done. #leadership #excellence #next chapter." I didn't like it. I didn't comment, I just saved it, not out of spite, out of habit. The deal was days away. The code was live, the fuse was burning, and I wasn't angry anymore, not sad, not bitter, not itching for revenge. No, I felt calm because I wasn't in the room anymore. I was the room, and soon, someone with the right eyes and the wrong timing was going to walk straight into it. It started with a pause, just one, a tiny beat of hesitation in the middle of a due diligence marathon. The CTO of the acquiring company, some Stanford-hardened, graying at the temples type, who still wrote code at 3 a.m. for clarity, had been combing through the repo like a detective with insomnia. Not because he didn't trust the paperwork. He just knew better. He wasn't there for the fluff. He was there for the edges, the parts the pitch deck skipped over. The corners where rot hides. The day before the Livestream deal, while the lawyers triple-checked indemnity clauses and PR rehearsed soundbites, he was in a quiet room with 3 monitors, a black coffee, and a growing itch behind his eyes. He scrolled, scanned, paused. Commit 7 CFA1D0. Cleanup, removed outdated module references. Looked harmless. Boring, even. The formatting was just a little too clean. No change ticket linked. No associated task in Jira. No approval thread. No Slack thread. No trace in any of the sprint logs the internal team had exported for the review. He clicked it open. Read it again. Sat back. There, tucked into a doc string, was a reference to something he hadn't seen mentioned anywhere else. In it tokenized dynamic, he ran a quick grep through the codebase. It popped up in 17 places, 17 critical places, and yet not in the docs, not in the architecture diagrams, not on any of the team's org charts or module ownership matrices. Just there, embedded, operational, and owned by someone who no longer worked there. That was enough to make him sit up straighter. He flagged the line, pulled up the repo's full history. Who committed it? Timestamp? User ID? He found it. The name, my name. Recently terminated. No formal offboarding note. No clarification from legal about transfer of rights or IP indemnity. That wasn't just odd. That was a landmine. Across town, the COO was doing breathing exercises in front of a mirror, smoothing the collar of her new blazer, barking at her assistant to double confirm the guest list for tomorrow's press stream. She'd never written a line of code, never debugged memory leak hell at 2 a.m. while a staging environment caught fire. He didn't see the fuse, didn't feel the chill that creeps in when an experienced engineer finds something undocumented, quietly active, and legally questionable. She was all smiles and mock confidence, toasting her own cleverness, trusting that the parade would start on time, because on paper, everything looked good. The codebase passed its static scans. Security team flagged 0 vulnerabilities. License checkers greenlit all known modules. The commit, just another box checked. A cleanup task done by a former employee. But the buyer's CTO, he knew that cleanup was often where the mess started. And now his eyes were locked on a single breadcrumb, one that didn't fit. One that smelled like rot under fresh paint. He didn't say anything yet, just clicked his pen twice, made a note, sat very still, because he didn't panic when he found problems. He got quiet. And quiet people are the ones who ruin deals. Ku, meanwhile, was in the green room, sipping champagne and laughing too loudly at a junior exec's joke about getting rich and never having to touch code again. She didn't know what had just shifted, but I did. From across the city, from the safety of my little rented apartment above a laundromat that never closed, I watched the company blog for updates. I kept a news alert on the buyer's ticker. Nothing yet, but something had happened. I could feel it, because when you plant a seed deep enough, long enough, and feed it with the right kind of silence, one day, you wake up and hear the roots cracking the foundation. Acquisition day. Everyone was dressed like it mattered. The stage was lit like a game show. The company banner, rebranded, sterilized, palatable, hung behind a glossy podium where the COO stood, grinning like she'd just won a fake lottery. R had transformed the main conference hall into a circus of borrowed dignity. Catered pastries no one ate, branded coffee cups, shaking in nervous hands, floral centerpieces that looked like they were trying too hard. Investors tuned in from San Francisco, New York, Singapore. Employees from 3 time zones logged into the livestream, watching the countdown like it was a lunar landing. In a small corner square of the video feed, the buyer's CTO appeared. No background blur, no fake smile, just a grim face framed by fluorescent office light and the reflection of too many monitors. He hadn't dressed up, he hadn't changed his shirt, and he hadn't logged in to clap. He was there to watch. The COO launched into her monologue. She had it rehearsed down to the breath. We started as a dream in a garage. I could almost hear her voice cracking at just the right syllable, gaining emotion in front of people who didn't know she once laid off 2 single mothers via email. The head of product nodded earnestly behind her. The finance lead smiled too wide. The intern running the stream kept one eye on the chat, praying nothing crashed. Halfway through, right after the COO dropped the phrase scalable innovation architecture, the buyer's CTO raised a hand. Not a wave. A flat-palmed, deliberate interruption. Pause the stream. The room froze. Intern's finger hovered above the trackpad like it was made of glass. The screen blinked. Technical difficulties. Please stand by slapped across the faces of 200 stakeholders. The COO blinked. Is there a problem? The CTO didn't answer right away. He shared his screen. It displayed one file, one commit. Mine. Can someone explain this? He said. His voice was even, cold. A scalpel, not a hammer. The commit message hung there like an indictment. 7 CFA 1D0 cleanup. Removed outdated module references. The room went quiet in a way that wasn't silence. It was a vacuum. One of the senior engineers cleared his throat, stepped forward. That's legacy. It passed checks. Nothing critical. The CTO's cursor hovered over a single line. Then why does it reference in it tokenized dynamic? This module isn't documented. It's running live in 3 services, all customer-facing. There's no license attribution, no chain of custody. And he double-clicked a section, zooming in. It's tagged with an embedded link to a private repo that we can't access. He let that sit for a moment. The room tilted. Someone from legal leaned in, whispering to the COO. She nodded too fast, her mouth suddenly dry. I'll need to check with the dev team, she said, forcing a smile. The CTO raised an eyebrow. This commit was made 2 hours before your final round of layoffs, a now terminated engineer, who, as far as our review shows, still retains partial ownership of the original module. Another pause. I assume that's just an oversight? The COO's jaw tightened. We'll have to investigate, he cut her off. We already are. Our legal counsel flagged the license lineage after I ran a reverse trace on the tokenization handler. Your team didn't disclose it. Either you didn't know or you chose not to know. The intern muted the room feed. Someone in the back dropped their coffee. I sat on my couch, barefoot, eating a bowl of cereal gone soggy. The news feed hadn't caught up yet. Twitter was still full of buzzwords. Investors hadn't gotten the email, but the deal was no longer a celebration. It was a crime scene, and I wasn't even in the room. I was just the fingerprint. That's legacy cleanup, the COO said, eyes darting like a poker player holding 7-deuce offsuit. She tried to keep her tone calm, tried to reattach her smile, but it slid sideways like a cheap magnet on a busted fridge. The CTO didn't blink. No, he replied, voice flat, but somehow louder than anyone else in the room. Legacy doesn't call undocumented APIs from deprecated vendor endpoints. Legacy doesn't initialize a module with no documented ownership. Legacy doesn't include a recursive loop of non-compliant third-party calls to services that are currently under litigation in the EU. His screen clicked again. He'd already run a license crawler, had already pulled vendor agreements, already highlighted every clause with a yellow box and a timestamp. The final blow was quiet. This one's tagged with a dual-layer fingerprint. SHA 512 under the top hash matches a commit chain from an open-source repo owned by. He paused to check his notes, knowing damn well what he was about to say. Your former engineer. Terminated 3 days before this file was pushed to master. The room cracked, not with sound, but with energy. That brittle, invisible pressure that builds when panic tries to hide behind posture. The finance lead lowered his head. The product manager leaned back slowly like she was trying to disappear into the wall. Buyer's general counsel joined the call. His face looked like it had aged a decade since the last time anyone saw him. I've been reviewing the IP clause, he said, his voice more like gravel than speech. If any module tied to a non-transferred license is found material to the operation of the platform prior to the acquisition signing, he trailed off, glancing at the CTO's screen. Then indemnification responsibility is multiplied. By 3. He looked up. Triple damages. Your company eats it. Someone swore under their breath. Someone else stood up and left the room like they were going to throw up. The COO stood still, lips parting, but no words came. The CTO didn't gloat. He didn't have to. He just highlighted another section of the commit. This calls 3 third-party APIs, all unlisted. None are covered in the shared vendor agreements. One of them is licensed under a usage restriction that explicitly forbids integration into enterprise commercial platforms. He clicked. The clause expanded. Bolded language, legalese in 12 PT font. Violation constitutes breach of intellectual property contract and forfeiture of indemnification protection. The words might as well have been bullets. Legal on the seller's side started whispering. Rapid fire. Panicked. The CTO scrolled back to the commit. Disguised cleanly. You have a smart team, but this isn't an accident. He looked straight into the camera. This was planted, not for sabotage, for exposure. Someone left this behind because they knew what they were doing, and they knew you didn't. The COO's mascara had started to smudge. She fumbled for a bottle of water, missed the cap, dropped it. The intern quietly closed the YouTube tab on the Livestream dashboard. The countdown to the press event froze mid-animation. Welcome to the future hung like a guillotine above them. At home, I refreshed the company site. Nothing yet, no news, but I knew. Inside that room, the air was burning, and they couldn't even scream, because the deal was collapsing and everyone could see who lit the match. Legal hit the wall around 3:27 p.m., not figuratively. I mean, someone in legal physically stood up, slammed their laptop shut, and said, "We've got a damn problem," loud enough that the whole floor flinched. Because after hours of clause combing, doc comparison, contract archaeology, they found it. The personal clause, the ghost in the licensing machine. It was buried in the original contributor agreement from when I was just a hungry contractor with too many Red Bulls and a half-broken keyboard. Back then, we were broke and desperate and building fast. I used my own LLC to push modules, while legal scribbled out boilerplates they barely skimmed. And in that mess of footnotes and faxed PDFs was a clause. All contributed modules not explicitly transferred remain the property of the contributor, unless acquired by separate contract. Guess which module never got the transfer addendum? Guess which module sits at the base of the session tokenization system? Guess what commit just put a spotlight on it? CTO forwarded the clause to the buyer's general counsel. The general counsel forwarded it to the board. The board CC'd external counsel and someone from compliance who apparently aged 10 years in 10 minutes. The realization hit like ice water. The module, the one I built, the one they still use, was mine. Not theirs. Mine. And by exposing it with a visible commit tied to a traceable identity after my termination, but before deal closure, it effectively stamped a great big flaming liability flag on their entire acquisition. Meaning, any attempt to use it moving forward without my written consent opened them up to lawsuit land. Meaning, the buyer couldn't close until the IP was cleaned up. Meaning, I now owned the bridge they were trying to cross, and my toll price, market rates, with interest. Around 4:11 p.m., I got the first email. Subject, time sensitive. Consulting opportunity from VP of Engineering tone, desperation glazed with fake cheer. We'd love to reconnect. Are you available for a short-term engagement to help resolve some legacy items ahead of final deal confirmation? I didn't answer. 10 minutes later came another. Subject, urgent. Licensing clarification from Associate General Counsel tone, cold, stiff, already sweating. Appreciate your assistance in clarifying ownership of the tokenized module. We believe there may be shared attribution due to historical overlap. Would you be open to a brief call today? Then came the final one. Subject, authorization request, compensation included from the COO herself. No greeting, no apology. Just an attached doc with a consulting agreement draft and the phrase, your cooperation would be greatly appreciated. Full rate, prepaid. I stared at it for a full minute, then opened the doc. They tripled my old salary, upfront, no strings, NDA already pre-signed on their end. They weren't asking for help. They were begging for indemnity. I replied with a single line. Market rates apply. Additional clause, I retain full authorship credit in all documentation. 10 minutes later, accepted. I signed from my phone while reheating leftover Chinese food, watching the acquisitions press countdown quietly disappear from the company homepage. The banner had changed. No longer welcome to the future. Now it just read, pending review. I wasn't angry, wasn't vindictive. I was just settled, because this wasn't revenge. This was leverage, and I had all of it. The stream never came back. After 40 minutes of dead air and a cheerful loop of royalty-free music playing over the technical difficulty screen, the chat was disabled. The countdown timer was pulled. The press kit download link broke. And behind the silence, the real story was still unraveling. Back in the boardroom-turned-PR war zone, the buyer's CTO stood like a man at a graveside. Calm, formal, holding no shovel, only the final word. He turned to the COO, arms folded like steel rods. Deals paused, he said, as if he were announcing the weather. Pending remediation. The COO's lips moved. Whatever came out was swallowed by the weight in the room. He continued, you'll need her cooperation. She owns the session handler module. Without it, your system doesn't pass compliance. Without compliance, we don't acquire. The last word, acquire, wasn't just a noun anymore. It was a scalpel slicing through months of bluster and balloons, and her expression finally broke. That glossy, curated confidence cracked into something raw. The realization that she wasn't running the show. Never had been. She nodded once, slowly, as if anything faster might make the whole building collapse. Cut to my inbox. New email. Subject, availability, urgent request timestamp. 4:59 p.m. I opened it. Hi again. As discussed, we're in need of your immediate support on the tokenized module. Unique familiarity with the architecture is critical to resolving pending legal and technical blockers. Please let us know your rate and terms. We can prepay. No intro, no apology, no face-saving flourish. Just need, I clicked reply, typed 4 words, market rates apply, prepay only, hit send. Then I stood up, stretched, walked to the kitchen. Poured myself the last of the diner-grade coffee I'd been nursing since the night before. No sugar, just the bitter bite of old caffeine and earned satisfaction. Walked back, sat on the couch, and watched the live acquisition page stall into digital rigor mortis. They hadn't taken it down, but they hadn't dared bring it back up either. Just that lonely screen. We'll be right back, with a little spinning loader. A promise no one believed. Outside, traffic passed like nothing was different. Somewhere across the city, the COO was probably shouting into a phone, trying to reframe the disaster as a temporary procedural delay. She could spin it however she wanted. But she knew, and now everyone else did too, because the truth didn't need volume, it just needed timing. I took a sip of coffee. No smile, no gloating, just silence. Bridges burned, earth salted, and a bank account about to get very, very warm. You're the real stars of the corporate jungle. Thanks for watching. Hit subscribe, or I'll flick the switch on your old cubicle memories.